Hi, everyone. Welcome to Reporters Roundtable. I am Rafe Needleman in San Francisco. This is our weekly show where we talk about a single tech topic each time. And today we are talking about the Mac operating system, OS X, or OS, as everybody calls it. Isn't that right?
Everybody calls it X.
Yeah.
But it's not.
No. It's OS X. The next one is going to be called Mountain Lion, and it's time for our yearly look at the Macintosh desktop laptop operating system evolution. Now, the operating system battle is evolving in really interesting ways, so I thought it'd be time for us to get back in and look at this. Smartphone operating system design is really influencing the desktop laptop operating system. The cloud is becoming an integral part of a localized operating system strategy. And to talk about that, I can think of no two better people than the guests I have today. First of all, our own intrepid Apple reporter, Josh Lowenson, who's joining us here. Josh, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, glad.
And Brian Chen from the New York Times, formerly of Wired, and author of Always On, How the iPhone Unlocked the Anything, Anytime, Anywhere future and locked us in.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Thanks for joining us, Brian. It's good to see you again. Brian was on the show back in 2010 when we were talking about the App Store, when that was a newer thing. And he's got some great stories on the Times, of course, you guys should all check out. Now, before I get started on the show, Mountain Lion was announced just a week and a day ago, officially, and people knew it was coming. But we just had the shareholders meeting, and I don't want to get too much into that, but because we have a whole newsroom out there, and Brian, I think you were aware of what was going on there. Josh, you were actually there. Anything important come out of the Apple shareholders meeting?
I mean, the most interesting part of those meetings, obviously, is the Q&A session, and that's when shareholders just basically get to get up and ask Tim Cook and whoever else is there any sort of questions they want. Mm-hmm. And so this year, some of the big questions were, are you doing a TV? Which, of course, they didn't talk about. Yeah. When's the next device coming out? Can't talk about that. But they did say some interesting stuff about Facebook. There have been questions lately about why Twitter over something like Facebook, which is monumentally larger and used by more people. Mm-hmm. And Tim Cook's answer to that was, you know what, we like Facebook, and we do kind of plan on doing more things with them. So it's kind of cryptic.
Interesting. Brian, anything you take away from that?
The shareholders meetings are usually just the shareholders saying, oh, you guys have so much money. What are you going to do with all this money? And then Apple says, well, we can't tell you what we're going to do with the money, but it's going to blow your mind this year. That's what they said, blow your mind. And so that's pretty much how I would summarize how shareholders meetings usually are for Apple, at least for the past few years.
Does Apple pay dividends?
No, they don't. And that was one of the big things that people were wondering about because now they have,
$100 billion in cash, right?
Well, it's not, they have a big chunk of cash, but in terms of like long-term securities, that makes up, kind of a big chunk of that. Yeah. But yeah, it's a lot of money. It's enough money to the point where you can buy, a lot of big companies and make a lot of acquisitions. And in fact, after the shareholders meeting last night, there was news that broke out that they had actually acquired Chomp, which is like a app store search tool for Android and iOS.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. That Chomp. I covered a really interesting app recommendation engine a while ago called Crosswalk.
Yeah.
I have to call them. They must be like, dang.
Sure. Yeah.
All right. Let's get into the operating system news, which we're here to talk about today. It's called Mountain Lion. It's like Lion S. It's like Leopard and Snow Leopard was Leopard S.
That's a good way to think about it. It's basically just kind of a few, new things tapped onto something that you already kind of know. It's not the major groundbreaking changes.
Now, first of all, when is Mountain Lion going to arrive for real people, not developers?
It's going to be in summer. They haven't said how much it costs yet, but it's going to be coming out in summer, which is just 1 year after Lion came out.
Now, Lion was a pretty major upgrade, and that was... How much was that for end users? $39 or something?
That was $30, and that was like when they started distributing it through the App Store instead of discs, and it sold really well. $30 is a pretty remarkable price for an operating system. I would imagine they're going to continue selling it for that price if they continue using the App Store to distribute it.
I want to talk about the economics of this briefly. $30 for a major operating system, if you're at all used to the Microsoft way of doing business, where Microsoft makes all its money from software, $30 is nothing compared to... Go ahead, Brian.
I think this goes along with Apple's business model, right? So they use software so that they can sell hardware. Mm-hmm. For the most part, they don't even need to make a lot of money on the software so long as you're buying a whole bunch of iPhones or Macs and so on. It benefits them to keep the price of the software low because they want to sell a whole bunch of hardware.
Now, Lion, the current operating system, the current version of OS 10, is quite good. Why does Apple need to do? I mean, they've accelerated the pace of their updates. It used to be, I think, Leopard and Snow Leopard were on a 2-year cycle. Then you got Lion and now Mountain Lion were on a 1-year cycle. Josh, why have they accelerated the pace of the major operating system updates?
I think it needs to keep pace with iOS and devices like the iPhone, the iPad. People are kind of really accustomed now to a yearly annual update that makes major changes. In the case of iOS 5, which they released in October, they kind of, a lot of these things that were a part of that, the main kind of apps and features, those have come over to Mac OS 10 now with Mountain Lion. And it's an understanding that people do things. People expect to be able to use some of the same things they have on their phone on their Mac because there are corollaries there, such as reminders and notes. Those are some of the big features that have come over.
One would think that it's difficult enough to make a major update to an operating system, no matter the platform, whether it's a smartphone, tablet, or a real computer. One would think that trying to get these two operating systems in sync, in some kind of feature or operational sync, if not code sync, would actually slow things down because they're separate projects. How is Apple able to start accelerating the pace of updates when actually it seems like the work they're doing is getting much more complex?
Well, I mean, yeah, go for it.
Sorry,
Brian.
go ahead. They have so much money, and they can just keep investing in the engineers to do this stuff. They don't need to pull back any punches anymore. And you can see with the yearly annual release of Mountain Lion OS 10 upgrades, they're going to keep going forward with that.
Mm-hmm.
You also have a big difference from companies like Microsoft, where there are just a ton of divisions kind of working on these things, and then try and pull little bits from each division, try and work together. It takes longer to do that. Whereas with Apple, you have kind of a core team of people who are working on this, and then there are also, in the case of iOS, they actually pulled some people over from Mac. Right. So those two teams are kind of very closely related when it comes to the engineering backgrounds and the overall goal of going in one direction.
Yeah, one of the things we learned from the Steve Jobs book was that that Steve Jobs was a fairly despotic ruler of Apple, and he hated the idea of divisions, which is a corporate concept of you got part of the company's doing this, part of the company's doing that. There were no divisions. He hated the words. It's like it's divisive. That's exactly the wrong idea. Is Apple still as unified under new leadership as it was under Jobs? I mean, the products we're seeing now are still have Jobs on them, right? Can it go on the way it was then?
I mean, it's hard to tell since they're so secretive, but considering that Mountain Lion is getting more and more like iOS, I would say that yes. I mean, it seems like they're getting pretty unified. Mountain Lion's getting a lot of the features that we already saw on the iPad and the iPhone.
Mm-hmm. And I think at least if you've read Adam Lashinsky's book Inside Apple recently, I mean, I think he makes the case that they just they march in a unifying order from the top, and a lot of that direction comes from just a very core group, and it kind of trickles down. But the people actually working in the products don't have as much of an idea of what's happening. So
shades of Foxconn,
slightly, but I mean, you kind of get this overall sense that they are working on these big projects, but the strategy behind them is very kind of connected together. It's less like this company's working on Zune, this one's working on Windows.
Right.
How can we get those two to work? It's like these two are being developed at the same time.
So speaking of working together, and speaking of the unification of all these products, we started talking, I think 2 years ago, about, we had this crazy idea, a lot of people did at the same time, OS 10 and iOS will merge, and eventually, and iOS will win. That was the idea. Because it's such a successful operating system and the user interface is so nice and so revolutionary that eventually our MacBooks and our iMacs will start to look like giant iPads. Are they going to merge? What do we predict about the link between OS 10 and iOS? Brian?
Well, I was thinking about this, and I thought, wouldn't it be kind of cool if I could take my iPad, I could dock it to a keyboard, and it turned into OS 10. I could start using a mouse and just use it like a regular PC. But then I thought about it more, and I thought, then why would they need to make Macs anymore and sell Macs? I think it's beneficial for them to keep the two products separate and tweak the operating system based on like the context of what you do with the device. Like with OS 10, you still have a mouse pointer, you still have a keyboard, and with iOS, you just have this big screen of different apps that you launch. So I think it's hard to tell, of course, what they're going to be doing in 5 to 10 years. I mean, they very well might unify the products at some point, but it would seem from a business standpoint, it would be better if they kept them separate.
I also think there's something really interesting to be said to add to the points about the input. If you've ever used a simulator with Xcode, which is Apple's kind of developer tool, and they have simulators for iPhone and iPad where you can test out your apps. If you've ever actually used a touch application with one of these simulators where you get to use your mouse and keyboard, it just feels weird. And there's this huge divide of actually if you were to bring some of those apps that you're used to on your iPhone or your iPad over to your computer, what that would actually feel like. In a lot of cases, I don't think it would work out.
It's interesting because I think Microsoft is fighting that exact battle right now with Windows 8 and Windows Phone, whatever it is, that they're really beginning to bring the experiences together, and people are already complaining about Windows 8, saying it's great with touch, but it just kind of feels weird with a mouse and keyboard. And I find it curious, I like your guys' comments on this, that Apple, the great company of unification, of a single vision, actually has two operating systems and it seems to be maintaining two completely separate code bases and user interaction models, even though there are some things that make them look and feel related, but they're clearly siblings, not clones. While Microsoft seems to be moving in the opposite direction of bringing everything together. I mean, it seems like a kind of evolutionary paradox that we're witnessing right now.
Yeah, and what do you think about that? Do you think that's going to be a good idea? Because I think we already saw some products where they tried to put two into one. We've seen convertible tablets where you rotate the screen and then you can touch it and then you rotate it back and it's a keyboard again. But the operating system for a convertible tablet is still a desktop operating system that you traditionally want to control with a keyboard and mouse. So when you try those things, they always feel kind of funky.
Josh?
And I forgot who said it, but there was this great kind of comment about when you're using Windows 8 and you're in the Metro interface, which is their kind of big touch thing with icons and tiles, and it's really lively, based off the phones. And then suddenly you get popped up to the Windows desktop, and it's like your drunk uncle kind of stumbles in the room. It's like, why is this here? I still think there's like a huge shift there. And the problem for developers in that case is that they really have to kind of design apps for these two kind of different interfaces with the same binaries. I mean, it's crazy. It's ambitious, but it's crazy.
I don't know. So do you think, Josh, we're going to see these OSs merge? I mean, at some level, at the core on the Apple side, there is some code similarity between iOS and OS 10, but one app won't run on both platforms, so they diverge pretty quickly off the floor of the code, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think it still all comes down to input. If it ever were to kind of have this life where you could have an iOS app on your computer, you really need to get past the interface hurdle first. And right now, the trackpad's great, but it's still missing that touchy-feeliness.
It's interesting that you're right. I mean, you just said something I think that's really key. It all comes down to input. It doesn't come down to processing power, which I think is very interesting. I mean, the mobile devices are becoming powerful enough to run real OSs. The problem is the input. And especially, and this is what I want to get into next, with the cloud, processing power is becoming less and less of an issue for OS design because so much of the key stuff, like Siri, for example, is being done in Cupertino or at Apple's servers somewhere else. And Brian, how important is the cloud to Mountain Lion and to the Apple desktop OS?
It seems like it's becoming increasingly important for Apple to focus on the cloud, and you can see that they just said that they were planning to open a new data center. Was it in Kansas? I forgot. Anyway.
Oregon.
Oregon, right. And the thing that the cloud does for Apple is it allows Apple to tie all the products together, but you're sharing the data between all these connected screens, these connected devices. And it makes more sense for you as a customer to keep buying Apple products because the cloud ties everything so seamlessly together. Like, I can edit a document on my Mac, and that same edit shows up on the iPhone version of the document editor. It makes a lot more sense to buy a Mac if you have an iPhone versus, say, a Windows computer.
Josh?
No, I think the cloud's a huge part. The one thing that doesn't kind of trickle down to those devices, there was talk a while ago of Apple possibly doing a storage-free iPhone where everything's based off of iCloud. This is before anyone knew what iCloud even was, by the way. But the whole idea was that everything would be stored in the cloud. And to a degree, they've already kind of done parts of that. For instance, if you have iTunes Match, you don't really need to keep any music on your phone anymore. You just kind of download what you need when you need it. That's kind of cool. And they've kind of taken that same stance with documents.
It's interesting. Google has actually done that successfully with Android. I mean, when you pull up an Android phone, you plug it into your Google account, and everything if you live in the Google ecosystem, everything you've done is there. The setup is really minuscule. Which is another approach, by the way, to the whole operating system battle. Which is, I mean, if Microsoft is going to sell an operating system, I mean, Windows 8 upgrade is going to be $139 or $59, or it's going to be a lot. And it's going to be a pain because when you upgrade your operating system every 4 years, that's a big upgrade. OS 10 is now moving to yearly, it appears. Google has just kind of updated all the time and is free. That's a different model entirely. How does that work, and can that become an important operating system? I'm not talking about smartphones now. I'm talking about desktops and Chromebook and that operating system concept.
You see a lot of Chromebooks around?
No, actually, I don't.
Where are you going with that?
Yeah.
I see them when I fly Virgin.
That's right, when they hand them out. All right, moving on. What's missing from... I don't want to ask that question yet, sorry. There's one other important topic with OS 10 that I think is real interesting, and we began to see this a version or two ago, the App Store. With Apple making their desktop operating system work the same way, or at least optionally work the same way, as iOS did, where you have an App Store. And you can now get your apps directly from within the interface and not have to leave it and not have to deal with installers. And the apps go with you no matter which installation of the product you're of your desktop or laptop that you're on. How important is the App Store to OS 10, to Mountain Lion? And are we going to see an App Store only version of OS 10?
I think on the surface, the App Store is pretty important for OS 10 in terms of security. There's that option, so you can switch it so you can only download apps through the App Store versus like the internet, and or through a web browser, I mean. And it sounds kind of draconian, but you can always turn that option off. And the whole option is there just for people who are a little bit less sophisticated with computers, so they don't need to worry about viruses.
Hey, every time I see Apple do something where there's an option to turn off some brand new feature, I know that it's only a version or two away from taking that option away from us. Seriously, do you think that's going to happen?
I think they've already gone too far with keeping the Mac a relatively open system in terms of being able to download applications from different avenues. I don't think they could just do a complete 180. I think that would be pretty unattractive for a lot of customers. What do you think?
Yeah,
I'm wondering.
I think from a legal level, I think they have to. Well, I'm not sure, because on mobile, they've offered it like that, but that's because there have been all these deals with carriers where it's been a security issue with this. There's this basic paradigm of computers where you want to install what you want to install, and you need to install what you want to install. But they've proven with devices like the iPad and the iPhone, people are kind of okay with convenience. They'll pay for that.
Right.
The problem is when you get apps that can't conform to the App Store rules, and therefore they can't be on the App Store. Well, what happens in that future? You don't have apps like VLC before it got pulled, which is this hugely useful Mac app, and that wasn't on there because there were licensing issues.
That's what I'm getting at. I mean, I think people like the App Store. When I look at a new app that I'm thinking about buying, and it's not in the App Store, it's like, oh God, now I got to deal with the installer, and if it's a paid app, I've got to pay through some other way. The App Store is super convenient and super great because your apps are archived for you no matter what machine you want to move to. I'm wondering how far Apple can go there, and also how this whole concept of the App Store and the frequent updates works in one of the major buyers of technology, which is the corporation. Is OS 10, is Mountain Lion more or less corporate friendly than previous versions have been? And how important is that?
Well, I think with Gatekeeper, it is corporate friendly, especially if you have companies that are kind of putting out versions of apps or deploying them through the App Store, through things like codes and through imaging. I think the issue more so is actually lagging companies that will wait for certain time periods to upgrade OSs. Suddenly, if it's a 1-year cycle and you actually have some critical kind of apps that need that and you want to use that for your business, that kind of runs into a problem. I don't think that's going to happen with Mountain Lion.
Do you think that corporations will upgrade Lion to Mountain Lion, or will we have a legion of corporate Mac users running a version or so behind because their IT departments are like, we just upgraded?
Yeah, I think that's a problem. But at the same time, you also, like we were talking about earlier, it's all about selling hardware. And for a lot of these folks who just bought it, I don't think $30, if that's what it's going to be, is a huge deal.
Brian?
Yeah, as for, I mean, even if you just look at Lion right now, I mean, I've talked to a bunch of IT people who just don't want to support Lion because it's still really buggy. I think there are problems with the Mail app, for instance, and I would hope that Apple fixes these problems before they switch to Mountain Lion, or I mean, before Mountain Lion comes out. So I'm a little bit pessimistic about the corporate support for Mountain Lion. Just my gut says that.
I don't know. I think you're probably right. I also imagine a bunch of IT guys, and I could be wrong on this, who are looking at all these updates and saying, job security for us. It's a lot of stuff we have to deal with. Because you know that individuals are going to be bringing their Mountain Lion equipped Macs into the office and using them there, no matter what they're supplied with. So, I don't know. Anyway, we talked about this briefly at the top of the show about Apple's integration of other services. Now, there are existing Macintosh apps, I think GarageBand, the movie app, what's that called? iMovie, and iPhoto, that are integrated to an extent with Facebook. And one of the things that they were showing with Mountain Lion was deep integration in parts of it with Twitter. So which is it going to be? And can it be both?
Well, I think if you look at where Facebook is on OS X right now, it's basically everywhere you want to be. Most people are going to do almost everything in the browser. So it's not, I don't see that as being like a huge, big pull. The two areas where it really is that it needs to be is with media. And so if you just cut a video in iMovie or QuickTime Player, you can send it to Facebook. If you just took a bunch of photos and edited them and you want to put them up on Facebook, there's integration there. The bigger thing now is Twitter with Mountain Lion, because then you can just take any page you're on, any sort of photo that's on your desktop, whatever it is, and share it.
I would imagine, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I would imagine that Apple's just cozying up with Twitter because it had tried to form a relationship with Facebook in the past, like with iTunes Ping. And Facebook had wanted some pretty onerous terms, or so to speak. That's what they told Kara Swisher at some point, or that's what Steve Jobs told Kara Swisher. And I would imagine that they might be more willing to work with Facebook if they kind of loosen those terms. We don't know what those terms are, but I'm sure they wanted a lot of customer information.
I can just see Zuckerberg and Jobs, or Zuckerberg and Cook, getting into it. It's like these two juggernauts of technology arguing terms. That would be epic.
And Apple is the most secret corporation on the planet, so I think it's hard for them to understand what social networking companies need in terms of customer information.
Interesting. So what's missing from Mountain Lion as far as we know?
Siri. There's no Siri.
Interesting.
Not that should be maybe too surprising, because they got to sell some phones, and right now that's the big feature.
Well, come on, people aren't going to be walking around with their computers using them as phones. I mean, Siri wouldn't? I mean, Siri is all cloud-based, so it's not like the technology won't work on OS X.
I mean, part of that is, hey, it fits and it doesn't. There's these new apps that came from iOS 5, and you can use Siri with them and on your phone, and it's great. Like reminders and notes, all that stuff that's a great use for voice technology. And I think the actual core need for Siri is that sometimes it's just a pain in the butt to get around your phone. Like, you don't want to unlock it, you don't want to find the app, you don't want to enter the data. It can do that for you. On the Mac, or if you have a bunch of apps running, you just you go in Expose, pick the app you want, and do your thing with a keyboard and mouse. It doesn't take very long. That said, there would be some cool applications for Siri on your computer, and people can dream of those all day, but maybe Apple is. Who knows?
Brian?
I can't really think of too much that's really missing, but Siri is one feature. I mean, the Mac operating system, I think they can just keep rolling out incremental additions, because we already do so much on our desktops in a browser. And just the App Store is, the avenue for you to get additional applications to enhance what you do on the computer. But yeah, I think we can expect to see some pretty incremental updates for the Mac operating system in the next few years.
What's the next one? Siamese? When do we expect it? Do you think we're on a yearly cycle now? And are we going to be eventually just paying Apple $30 a year, just saying update me whenever? You think that's coming?
I think you're going to be buying a new computer every 2 years.
Damn,
not worrying about it. And then paying them $30 in between, yes.
Yeah. Brian, what do you think? We have another one coming a year after Mountain Lion?
I think they have explicitly said that they were on an annual cycle. At least that's what they told John Gruber, I think, during that briefing.
Yeah.
So assuming they keep on making boatloads of money, which I'm sure they will over the next few years, they probably will keep on continuing that cycle and asking for $30 a year, sure.
Not that much to pay, actually.
And I think another
Right.
big part of that is that you do need something to make the Mac more exciting because it's still a computer and they're selling a lot more of them than they used to, but it's nothing close to what they're selling on iOS. And a big part of that is that you get these new features every year.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can somehow add that on top of things like more RAM and faster processing speeds, I mean, that's cool too. That's a good business model. It's worked really well for them on the portable side.
What can they do next? I mean, the Air and OS 10, a couple of additional features in Mountain Lion. I mean, how do you make I don't want to sound like a fanboy, so forgive me, but this is a pretty damn sexy product. I mean, where do you go from here?
Flexible displays.
That's a good one. Okay, keep going.
Just roll up the screen and put it in your jeans and take your computer with you everywhere you go. I think that'd be kind of cool, like going beyond the tablet. I've always thought of the tablet as sort of the stopgap between, computers and flexible displays. But, I'm just imagining things right now.
I'm just trying to think about cleaning that thing. How do you even do it? Use like a spaghetti maker?
Yeah, totally, yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know where I'm going
Tubular
with
displays.
Exactly.
The fettuccine display. All right, guys. Hey, listen, thanks for an interesting discussion on Mountain Lion. Thanks, Mitchell, for producing, standing in for Stephen. Brian's excellent work can be found on the New York Times. It's Brian Chen. Also, his book is on Amazon. We'll have links in the show notes to all the stories that are relevant, which is like every other story we write about on news.com. Josh
Hey, thanks a
Lowenson.
lot.
Thanks, Josh Lowenson. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week. We're going to do a show next week on the second screen, on watching TV with an iPad or Android tablet in your lap. Don't miss it. All right, we'll be back next week. Thanks, everyone.